Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack the incredible complexities of, well, the human body. Think about it for a second.
Right.
Just lifting your coffee cup or, running a full marathon. Your body is constantly performing these amazing feats of engineering. Every single movement, every bit of effort, it involves this complex symphony, cells, tissues, whole organ systems all working together. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into exercise physiology and sports science. We're leaning heavily on the insights from Boron and Boulpaep's Medical Physiology. Our mission, to unpack how our bodies actually turn chemical energy into mechanical work, what limits performance, and how our bodies adapt often incredibly well to physical stress. So whether you're a college student hitting the books, a future doctor, or honestly just curious about how you work, we're going to try and make these complex ideas clear, engaging, and relevant.
Absolutely. And just to set the stage a bit, remember how much of you is skeletal muscle. It's huge. We're talking 30, maybe even up to 50% of your body mass, which means really any muscular activity kicks off these rapid integrated adjustments across your whole system, from the tiniest muscle fibers all the way up to your heart and lungs, coordinating everything.
And here's something that always blows my mind. Only about, 25% of the energy from our food actually becomes work?
That's right, just a quarter. The other 75%, it's just lost as heat.
Which sounds terribly inefficient.
Well, it means heat management becomes absolutely central. It's not just a side effect. It dictates so much about cardiovascular function, fluid balance, even just your ability to keep going. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, let's dig in. Segment 1. The absolute basics, how muscles contract and how they get stronger. It starts with the motor unit, right? What exactly is that?
The motor unit is the fundamental functional piece. It's one single motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it connects to, all the ones it activates. And crucially, when that neuron fires, every single fiber in that unit contracts together simultaneously.
And the level of control we have depends on how many fibers are in each unit.
Precisely. We call it the innervation ratio. Fewer fibers per neuron means a small motor unit, giving you really fine, precise control. Think about threading a needle. More fibers per neuron means a large motor unit built for power, like, lifting a heavy weight.
Okay, so we have these units. How does the body ramp up the force when it needs more? Just activate more units.
It's a bit more elegant than that. It follows something called the size principle. This is really fundamental. Motor units are recruited progressively. Think of it like adding dimmer switches. You start with the smallest, easiest to activate motor units first. These are typically your type I, slow-twitch fibers, great for endurance, low-intensity stuff.
Because the smaller neurons are easier to get going.
Exactly. They have higher membrane resistance, so they reach their firing threshold faster. So small, fatigue-resistant units first. Then, as you need more force, you progressively recruit larger and larger motor units, the faster, more powerful, but also more fatigable type II and II units.
And they don't all fire at once.
No, that's key. They fire asynchronously, meaning they don't all contract at the exact same microsecond. This smooths out the overall contraction, making it fluid instead of jerky.
So it's recruitment, adding more units. Is there another way to increase force?
Yes, there is. Besides recruiting more units, the brain can also increase the frequency at which the already active motor neurons are firing. That's called rate coding. So you can make the active units work harder, essentially. Different muscles rely on recruitment versus rate coding to different extents.
Got it. And you mentioned different fiber types within these units.
Right. And a key point, all the muscle fibers within one specific motor unit are the same type. Consistency is key for function. We generally talk about three main types. Type I, which are slow twitch, type Tia, which are fast but fatigue resistant, and type Ib, which are fast but fatigue very quickly.
And they have pretty different characteristics.
Oh, vastly different. Speed, for instance. Type I fibers are slow. Imagine watching a single muscle twitch option. Type I fiber takes a while to build tension and relax. Type Tia and II are much, much quicker, like a snap.
And force.
Type I produce lower peak force, again, good for fine control. Type Ia produce more force, and type I produce the most peak force. They're built for power.
What about how they make energy and how long they last? Their metabolism.
That's where their personalities really show. Type I fibers are the marathon runners. They're packed with mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, and have lots of capillaries supplying oxygen. They run on aerobic metabolism, burning sugars and fats, so they're highly resistant to fatigue.
Okay, endurance specialists.
Then type 2, these are kind of intermediate, faster than type I, more mitochondria, and better oxygen supply than type I, so they have better endurance than I. Think middle distance runners, maybe?
And type I. the sprinters.
Exactly. They're built for speed and power. They rely heavily on anaerobic glycolysis, making energy quickly without much oxygen. They contract forcefully and rapidly, but they burn out fast. Very fatigable. If you could picture their force output, type I would be a long, steady line. Type I would be a huge initial spike that plummets quickly. Type I somewhere in between.
It's amazing how specialized they are. But contraction isn't just the fibers, right? You mentioned tendons and connective tissue acting like springs.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the mechanics. The force the fibers generate isn't just internal, it has to be transmitted to the bones. This happens via connective tissues and tendons, and these tissues have elasticity. They act like springs. We call them series elastic elements. When a muscle contracts isometrically, holding steady, not changing length, the muscle fibers actually do shorten internally, but they do it by stretching these elastic elements.
Ah, so that stored energy in the stretch is important, like in running.
Precisely. The stretch-shorten cycle. When you land, your calf muscle and Achilles tendon stretch. This stores elastic energy. Then, when you push off, that stored energy is released, adding to the force generated by the muscle contraction itself. It makes the movement more powerful and saves energy.
Clever. Now, besides holding steady, isometric, there's shortening, concentric, and lengthening eccentric contractions.
Right. A concentric contraction is when the muscle shortens while generating force like lifting a weight or climbing stairs. It's doing positive work. Peak power usually happens at moderate speeds and loads. An eccentric contraction is when the muscle is lengthening while still generating force, like lowering that weight slowly or walking downstairs. It's resisting the load, absorbing power, doing negative work.
And those eccentric ones are tougher on the muscle.
They are. They're more likely to cause muscle soreness or damage. That's partly because the passive tension from those stretch elastic elements adds significantly to the total force the muscle is experiencing. The overall force is just higher.
And how we learn movements plays a role, too, like a beginner versus an expert.
Absolutely. Learning refines how the nervous system activates these muscles. A novice might be stiff, maybe even co-activating opposing muscles, which wastes energy. But with practice, the activation patterns become smooth, efficient, coordinated. Think of a skilled pianist. Their fingers seem to fly effortlessly because their nervous system has optimized every tiny muscle activation. It's learned efficiency.
Okay, so we've got the mechanics down, but none of this happens without energy. And during exercise, muscle energy use can skyrocket, like over 100 times. How does the body cope?
It's a massive challenge requiring a highly integrated response. The body has to mobilize fuel, glycogen, and fats stored in the muscle, but also glycogen from the liver and fats from adipose tissue. And at the same time, deliver oxygen in these fuels fast enough so that ATP synthesis, making the energy currency, keeps up with ATP breakdown, using the currency.
And there are basically three main energy systems that contribute.
That's right. You can think of them in terms of how quickly they provide energy and how long they last. First, you have the immediate energy system, ATP and phosphocreatine. Super fast, but gone in seconds.
Like flicking a switch.
Pretty much. It powers the very start of exercise or sudden bursts. You use the tiny amount of ATP stored directly in the muscle. Then an enzyme uses phosphocreatine, or PCR, to rapidly remake ATP from its breakdown product, ADP. PCR stores are maybe 5 times bigger than ATP stores, but even combined, they only last for maybe, 5 to 10 seconds of all-out effort. But importantly, the breakdown products of ATP act as signals to get other systems going.
So when that runs out, what's next in line?
Then anaerobic glycolysis kicks in. It's still pretty rapid at making ATP, but it's limited, lasting maybe up to a minute or so of high-intensity work. It mainly uses glycogen stored right there in the muscle. It breaks down glucose without needing oxygen, producing lactate as an end product in that situation.
But there's a downside.
The big one is lactic acid production. It dissociates into lactate and hydrogen ions, H+ on. Those H+ ions make the muscle cell acidic, lowering the pH, and that acidity is self-limiting. It inhibits key enzymes in glycolysis itself, and it directly interferes with the muscle contraction machinery. Plus, it's inefficient, only gives you 2 ATP per glucose molecule.
So for anything longer than a minute or so, you need the third system.
Exactly. Oxidative metabolism or aerobic metabolism.
Yeah.
This is your long-haul system. It's slower to get fully up to speed, takes a minute or two for your heart and lungs to ramp up oxygen delivery. But once it's going, it provides a much larger amount of ATP, and it can sustain activity for hours, as long as fuel and oxygen are available. It yields way more ATP, around 30 ATP per glucose, and even more from fats.
And what fuels this aerobic engine?
Primarily glucose, which can come from the blood released by the liver from its glycogen stores or from muscle glycogen itself. Also, fatty acids released from adipose tissue, and even lactate can be used as fuel.
You mentioned glucose uptake increases hugely during exercise. How does that happen, especially without insulin?
That's a really neat mechanism. Contracting muscle cells actually move glucose transporters, called GLUT4, to their surface membrane independently of insulin. This means exercise allows muscles to take up glucose even when insulin levels are low, which happens during prolonged exercise. This is clinically super important. It's why exercise is a cornerstone of managing blood glucose in type 2 diabetes.
Okay, and you said lactate can be fuel too. It often gets a bad rap as just waste.
It really does get a bad rap. But lactate isn't just waste. Yes, high levels contribute to fatigue via acidity, but it's also an energy substrate. Muscles, especially those highly oxidative type I fibers and the heart, can take up lactate from the blood, convert it back to pyruvate, and burn it aerobically for energy. There's even a lactate shuttle, where lactate produced by, say, fast-twitch fibers can be used by nearby slow-twitch fibers. And the liver can take up lactate and use it to make new glucose through gluconeogenesis, especially during prolonged exercise or recovery. That's the Cori cycle.
Fascinating. So lactate's being recycled and reused. What about fats? They're the biggest energy store, right?
By far. Your fat cells store a huge amount of energy as triglycerides. During exercise, particularly prolonged moderate-intensity exercise, your sympathetic nervous system stimulates the breakdown of these fats, releasing fatty acids into the blood. These fatty acids are then taken up by muscles, especially those type I fibers, and oxidized aerobically. They yield a massive amount of ATP, making them a crucial fuel source for endurance.
So the body shifts between fuels. How does it decide whether to burn carbs or fats?
There's this concept called the crossover point. At lower intensities, your body prefers burning fat. It's efficient and spares your limited glycogen stores. But as you increase the intensity, you cross over to relying more heavily on carbohydrates, muscle glycogen, and blood glucose. Carbs give you a bit more ATP per liter of oxygen consumed, which becomes important when oxygen delivery might be limiting at higher intensities. Having more fatty acids available can help spare glycogen, letting you exercise longer at moderate intensities.
Okay, but eventually, even with all this fuel, fatigue sets in. What exactly is muscle fatigue?
Fatigue is basically the inability to maintain the desired power output. You see a decline in both the force the muscle can produce and the speed at which it can shorten. Force usually drops off first and more significantly. Underlying it are often issues with calcium release and reuptake inside the muscle cell. But it's important to see fatigue as protective. It stops you from pushing the muscle to the point of actual damage. It's temporary and reversible with rest.
Right. It's not weakness, it's a safety mechanism.
Yeah,
And fatigue can come from the brain or the muscle itself, central versus peripheral.
exactly. Central fatigue originates in the brain and spinal cord. It might involve changes in sensory feedback from the muscles or reduced drive from the brain to the motor neurons. It's probably more of a factor for novices or in monotonous tasks. Interestingly, sometimes external motivation, like cheering crowds, can actually override some central fatigue. Peripheral fatigue, though, happens within the muscle fiber itself. And let's be clear, it's generally not a failure of the signal crossing from nerve to muscle at the neuromuscular junction. That process is usually very robust.
So what is going wrong in the muscle fiber?
It's usually a combination of things. Problems propagating the electrical signal along the muscle membrane, impaired handling of calcium ions needed for contraction, running low on fuel substrates like glycogen, and importantly, the buildup of metabolic byproducts.
And there are different kinds of peripheral fatigue depending on the exercise.
Yes, we can broadly distinguish two types. High-frequency fatigue happens during short bursts of intense exercise, mainly involving those type 2 fibers. The issue here is often electrical. The rapid firing of action potentials causes ions like sodium and potassium to cross the membrane faster than the cell's pumps can restore the balance. This can disrupt the membrane's electrical potential, making it harder to fire new action potentials and impairing calcium release. It usually recovers relatively quickly, maybe within 30 minutes. Then there's low-frequency fatigue. This is more typical of prolonged, moderate-intensity exercise involving type I fibers. Here, the main problem seems to be a more persistent impairment in calcium release from the internal stores, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This reduction in calcium release has a bigger impact at the lower firing frequencies typical of endurance activity. And this type of fatigue can take much longer to recover from, sometimes hours or even days.
So going deeper into peripheral fatigue, what are the main biochemical culprits?
Well, ATP depletion, while buffered, can occur locally at critical sites like the contractile proteins or membrane pumps, impairing their function. The accumulation of ATP breakdown products, particularly inorganic phosphate guy, is thought to play a significant role in reducing force production. And we come back to lactic acid accumulation. That drop in pH, sometimes down to 6.2, which is very acidic for a cell, inhibits key enzymes, interferes with calcium binding to the contractile machinery, and directly impairs the force-generating cross bridges. The combination of low pH and high pi is a potent recipe for reduced force.
And all marathon runners hit. That's definitely fuel related.
That's the classic example of glycogen depletion. When the glycogen stores within the working muscles, primarily type I and III fibers in this case, run low during prolonged exercise, the muscles simply can't produce ATP fast enough from other sources like blood glucose and fats to maintain the desired intensity. Performance drops sharply. That's why carbohydrate loading is a strategy for endurance athletes, maximizing those muscle glycogen stores beforehand.
Okay, let's shift to the ultimate ceiling on aerobic performance. VO2 max, maximal oxygen uptake. What is it measuring?
VO2 max is really the gold standard measure of your body's maximal aerobic power. It's the highest rate at which your body can take in, transport, and utilize oxygen during exhaustive exercise. In elite athletes, it can be incredibly high, maybe 20 times their resting oxygen consumption. It reflects the integrated function of 3 steps: getting oxygen into the lungs, the cardiovascular system delivering that oxygenated blood to the muscles, and the muscles extracting and using that oxygen in their mitochondria.
And there's debate about which of those steps is the main bottleneck.
Oh yes, a long-standing debate. One view is that lung uptake could be limiting, at least in some very elite athletes whose hearts pump blood so fast through the lungs that it doesn't have quite enough time to fully load up with oxygen. But the most widely held view, supported by a lot of evidence, is that the cardiovascular system's ability to deliver oxygen is the primary limiting factor for most people. Specifically, maximal cardiac output, how much blood the heart can pump per minute. Training dramatically increases maximal cardiac output, and this tracks very closely with increases in VO2 max. A third perspective suggests muscle oxygen extraction might become limiting, arguing that even if delivery is sufficient, the diffusion of oxygen from the capillaries to the mitochondria inside the muscle cells might not be fast enough at maximal rates.
Now add heat to the mix. Exercising in the heat creates a real conflict for the cardiovascular system, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Your circulatory system has 2 massive demands. Send blood to the working muscles to deliver oxygen and fuel. A and D send blood to the skin to dissipate heat and cool the body. This puts a huge strain on cardiac output. Plus, your effective circulating blood volume tends to decrease during prolonged exercise in the heat.
Why does blood volume drop?
Several reasons. First, increased pressure in muscle capillaries pushes fluid out of the blood and into the surrounding tissue. Second, you're losing fluid directly through sweating and losing more than about 3% of your body weight. This way significantly increases the risk of heat illness. Third, a lot of blood pools in the skin veins for cooling, reducing the amount returning to the heart. The body tries to compensate by constricting blood vessels in areas like the gut to maintain blood pressure, but it's a trade-off. Maintaining pressure might come at the cost of reduced blood flow to the skin, hindering cooling, or even reduced flow to the muscles themselves.
And sweating is the main way we cool down. We have different types of sweat glands.
2 main types, acrine and apocrine. Apocrine glands are mostly in hairy areas like armpits and groin, produce a thicker, odorous secretion, and aren't really involved in temperature regulation. Acrine glands are the important ones for cooling. There are millions of them all over your body. They produce the watery, mostly odorless sweat that cools you down when it evaporates.
How do they end that sweat?
It's a 2-step process. Deep in the skin, a coiled part of the gland actively secretes a fluid that's initially quite similar in salt concentration to plasma isotonic. It pumps out sodium, chloride, and other things, and water follows by osmosis. Then, as this primary secretion flows up a duct towards the skin surface, cells lining the duct actively reabsorb sodium and chloride back into the body, but crucially, the duct isn't very permeable to water.
Oh, so salt gets pulled back out, but water doesn't follow as much.
Exactly. So the final sweat that emerges onto your skin is hypotonic. It has a lower salt concentration than your body fluids. You lose more water relative to salt.
What does losing this hypotonic fluid do to the body?
It means your remaining body fluids become slightly more concentrated, more hyperosmolar. This pulls water out of your cells, so sweat loss effectively dehydrates all body compartments, and the saltiness of sweat changes too. At low sweating rates, the ducts have plenty of time to reabsorb most of the salt, so sweat is very dilute. At high sweating rates, the flow is too fast for complete reabsorption, so sweat becomes saltier, though still hypotonic to plasma.
That difference in salt content is actually used diagnostically, isn't it?
Yes, in cystic fibrosis, individuals with CF have a defect in a chloride channel, CFTR, in the sweat duct cells. This impairs chloride reabsorption and sodium follows chloride, so they can't reabsorb salt properly. Their sweat is abnormally salty, which is a key diagnostic test.
And when rehydrating after sweating a lot, just drinking plain water isn't ideal.
It's a common mistake. Drinking large amounts of plain water dilutes your blood plasma's sodium concentration. This actually reduces your sensation of thirst before you're fully rehydrated, and it signals your kidneys to excrete more water. Including some sodium chloride with the water you drink, like in sports drinks, helps maintain plasma osmolality, keeps the thirst drive active, and encourages better fluid retention, leading to more complete rehydration.
And people adapt to heat.
Yes, remarkably. With heat acclimatization over days to weeks, the sweat glands become much better at reabsorbing salt, partly thanks to the hormone aldosterone. So trained, acclimatized individuals produce more sweat overall, but it's more dilute sweat. This helps conserve precious body salt and maintain blood volume during dehydration.
Okay, let's wrap up with training adaptations. How does regular aerobic exercise rewire the body? What are the key principles?
For training to cause adaptation, you generally need four things: intensity above a certain threshold, sufficient duration of exercise sessions, regularity, doing it often enough, and really importantly, adequate rest between sessions. Adaptations happen during recovery, and if you stop, you lose the benefits. Use it or lose it.
How does training improve that crucial oxygen delivery we talked about?
The biggest factor driving the increase in VO2 max with endurance training is an increase in maximal cardiac output. And that increase in cardiac output comes primarily from an increase in maximal stroke volume, the amount of blood the heart ejects with each beat. Maximal heart rate doesn't really change much with training.
How does stroke volume increase?
Two main ways. First, training leads to plasma volume expansion. Your body makes more blood plasma, which increases the amount of blood returning to the heart preload. Thanks to the Frank-Starling mechanism, a fuller heart contracts more forcefully, ejecting more blood. Second, the heart muscle itself undergoes hypertrophy. It gets bigger and stronger, like any muscle worked regularly.
What about red blood cells? Does sports anemia mean athletes are actually anemic?
No, not usually. Red blood cell mass does increase with training, but the plasma volume often increases even more. So the concentration of hemoglobin might be slightly lower, but the total amount of hemoglobin and oxygen carrying capacity is actually higher. It's a beneficial dilution effect, not a true anemia. This increased blood volume also helps with temperature regulation in the heat.
So delivery improves. What about the muscle's ability to use the oxygen? Extraction.
That improves too, though it contributes less to the overall VO2 max increase than the delivery side. A major adaptation is capillary proliferation. Trained muscles literally grow more capillaries. This increases the surface area for oxygen exchange between blood and muscle fibers, shortens the distance oxygen has to diffuse, and slows down blood flow slightly through the muscle, giving more time for oxygen extraction. And alongside more capillaries, you get more mitochondria. Endurance training can stimulate a near doubling of mitochondrial content within muscle fibers.
Wow, double the powerhouses. How does that happen?
It's called mitochondrial biogenesis. The repeated stress of muscle contraction, particularly the resulting changes in calcium levels and energy status within the cell, activates signaling pathways. These pathways switch on genes that lead to the production of new mitochondrial proteins and enzymes, essentially building more mitochondria. The huge benefit of having more mitochondria isn't just slightly better oxygen extraction at VO2 max. It dramatically increases the muscle's capacity to use oxygen to burn fuels, especially fats. This is key for endurance. It allows trained muscle to rely more on fat for energy at any given moderate intensity, which spares precious muscle glycogen. This glycogen sparing directly reduces lactate production and delays fatigue, allowing athletes to perform for much longer.
Incredible. We've covered a huge amount today. From the motor unit, the building block, through energy systems, fatigue, limits like VO2 max, dealing with heat, and finally these amazing training adaptations. It really highlights how exercise physiology is all about the body's integrated, dynamic, and incredibly adaptable response to the stress of movement.
Absolutely. And look, we've just skimmed the surface of some really deep concepts from Boron and Boulpaep. It can feel like a lot, I know, but breaking it down piece by piece, focusing on the mechanisms, it's definitely something you can grasp. You really are capable of mastering this stuff.
So as a final thought to leave you with, we've talked about the body's incredible physical adaptability. But considering all that, what do you think might be the ultimate, perhaps non-physical, limit to human athletic performance? And why is that limit, whatever it is, so incredibly hard to push past?